welcome to the Kaysville City Planning Commission meeting for September 27th. We'll start with item number 2. It's the conditional use permit.
Okay, yeah, I'll be happy to give a quick introduction to that, and then if you have questions of myself or the applicant, who I believe is here. The request is for a home business. It's at 2352 West Island Drive. It's the very far west side of town, right by Case Creek Elementary School, and really about the farthest west point technically you could possibly get in the end of the cul-de-sac. Ms. West is requesting to be able to run a boutique, clothing boutique out of the house. Much of it is online type sales and retail, but she does hope to have a couple hours a day where by appointment people could come in, try on an item, look through a couple things, or just pick up an order. So having reviewed the request with her, staff's recommending approval of the proposed conditional use with one following condition: that the customers come by appointment only, and that they be no earlier than 6 and no later than 8. And I'll just read what I wrote because I'm going to say it weird every time. Take place around school pickup and drop-off time. So obviously being right there next to the student drop-off portion, it can get pretty busy at the morning and afternoon peak on that, and she would just coordinate around that so it doesn't create additional traffic issues in the neighborhood. And so with that, I'll leave it to the Planning Commission, put it back to you, and be happy to answer any questions.
It's pretty straightforward.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't have any questions.
Oh. It's been indicated to me that I have a typo, that 6 a.m. and 8 a.m. That's supposed to be a p.m. So we'll give her more than 2 hours to.
Well, I wasn't sure because in the description it said that there would be a few hours a day that people would come by, and
Yeah.
I thought, yeah, I'll say
We really were limiting it there. Yes,
that's pretty few hours.
Most likely it will be a couple of hours a week, not per day.
Oh, okay.
So while we're clarifying that, it says appointments to be made ... around school pickup and drop-off times, or to avoid. No.
That's the intent, is so that they don't take place at the same time as school pickup or drop-off. So there could be, as you're stating, Commissioner, a better way to word that.
Do we want to be as specific as saying a certain time frame, or we just leave it general?
I think if we say avoid pickup, I mean, everybody's.
And I consider doing that, but then
drop-off.
school's not taking place every day of the year, so during the summer it would change, or breaks and things. So, but again, you could word that also if that were appropriate.
I think just limit it to school drop-off and pickup times. That probably covers it.
May I say something? I'm Mindy.
Please come forward and state your name.
I'm Mindy West. Just as far as your concerns for school pickup and drop-off, I have 5 children that attend that elementary school. So I certainly understand the ins and outs and the safety issues of having people coming and going and adding to that congestion. I often can't get into my own driveway if I'm not already home at that time. So I have no intention and would not, and everybody who's around there would never try to come to my house during that time either. But it won't always just be local to the neighborhood. So but I will make sure that I don't schedule appointments around those times.
Great. Any other questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Take a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'd make a motion that we approve the conditional use permit for let me get the right one, for a major home occupation B clothing boutique at 2352 West Island Drive with the conditions as noted on the staff report.
I'll second.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Great. Okay, next, item number 3, conditional use permit for an electric message center sign for Wasatch Sign Franklin Group at 69 East, 200 North.
Okay. By way of introduction, so just north of us, next to the library and Walgreens, we got the Franklin Group that's operating in the business and has been for some time, a great store. And they're hoping to put in some signage on the property. Currently, they only have signs on the building facade and walls. They don't have any pole or monument type signs at all on the site. And so the request before you, because it includes an electronic message center as a conditional use, what that means is part of the sign will be a static cabinet that, as you can see here on the image proposed, the black Better Homes and Franklin Group would be the same all the time essentially. Would be backlit. However, the other eagle portion or component of that, half the signage, changes images, scrolling text, and that type of deal on it. So based on our ordinance, that requires a planning commission review and approval. The size of the sign, we're going to throw you for a bit of a curveball here, and the applicant's aware of that. So what you have in your packet, it's 5 foot 7 inches from the base to the top of the sign. Just speaking with them today as they're kind of considering, getting close to actually doing it, making sure they get it spot on. They'd be interested in actually building that rock base up a little bit higher, about another foot, in order to be able to put snow if you're plowing the parking lot and stuff, so it packs up and doesn't hit or block the actual signage and sign cabinet on top. So that would increase the sign size. It's currently, as you've seen it, at 83 square feet. That would bump it up another 15 to about 98 square feet, which would still fit under the maximum amount allowed of signage based on their proximity to the freeway. They can be as tall as 8 feet, and so they would still be 6'7" under that maximum allotted height. The other, if you'll head to the site plan, Andy, that items of note is where it's positioned. So it is on, again, facing 200 north. You'll see here on the presentation, big revised plan at the top. So originally they pushed it back into the parking stalls. It was about 12 feet behind the sidewalk. And staff had a recommendation that, based on our parking lot layout standards, that it be moved to 14 feet from the back of sidewalk so that it allowed turn radius and access back and forth in that area. They're actually requesting to change that. We're pushing them further back, and they kind of ring a bell. It gets less and less visible. We'd like to have it closer to the street. Frankly, I think as a staff, we prefer this revision, pushing it to the street and essentially blocking that east and west access in the parking lot. And so the desired request, again, is closer to the street than what you had in your packet, but is just 2 feet from the back of the sidewalk, essentially blocking that access. You got the landscape island there in place, and they can talk a little bit further about their intentions as the applicant is here this evening. So puts us in a little bit of a tricky spot. Again, just with conversations with the applicant in this direction, I think it's a good thing from our perspective as staff. However, we've not thoroughly reviewed it. These are plans that we got today on the revision. I do believe it meets the minimum requirements. I believe with the proper details, it can make a functionable parking lot and possibly better than the existing conditions. But whether you're prepared to make that call on the fly with the quick information or not, or at least get information from the applicant if we need to revisit this with more details, that may be an appropriate course of action. So with that, I'll end my piece of the presentation and turn it back to the Planning Commission. And be happy to take questions, and the applicant's here as well to explain further details as desired.
Great, thank you.
I had a question for staff. How many companies are in that building? Are there 3?
Well, I might leave that up to the applicant. There are multiple. I know there's the boutique, Franklin Group. If, with your permission, we'll have her approach and make sure we get you the right answer.
Please just state your name, please.
Hello, I'm Shelley Russin. Thank you for having us. So we have a chiropractor, a clothing store, and a dance company clothing store in the very end. And then salons are all along that west side. And we also have in the middle is another clothing store that just rents warehouse space from us.
And the reason I asked the question, could each of those companies also put a sign out there?
Yes, that's a great question. So the allotted sign is not per company, but per property. And so they get one sign per the frontage that they've got, and the total square footage, if they allotted all to one business, would take it away from the other. So I would assume the beauty of the electronic message component is it allows the different companies that are in there to utilize the same size space.
Exactly. They'll have an opportunity to do that if they choose to advertise on the message center portion.
Do you own the building?
Yes. Just one mention, too. I don't know, Lyle, if you talked about the green space. So our intention is to put 4 feet of green space all around that sign.
Yeah, so if you can see on the site plan, you've got the sign itself, and it would be essentially in a landscape island. They would bring water out to it, which is a unique piece to this property that currently has 0 green space, so it would add to that. And
So this is not working. Each side of the. Okay, here we go. Let's give this one a shot. Okay, so this dimension from here to here is not 4 feet. Where's the 4 feet? Back of curb to back of curb? Is that?
it's probably the 2 feet on both sides.
Oh, I
think
see.
it's a
So
2 foot. So
5'8". I'm still okay. 7. Okay.
Can I have drawings that are more recent, which is the one that you were sent? I think
yeah, so this is the most recent drawing. It
So
should
this one
reflect what
shows
was.
That's helpful enough.
This is
everything.
modified from what you have here before you as well. So yeah, this has been increased.
Pass it around.
I have copies. Do you want copies?
Oh, yeah, so that's a lot more. Got it. It is 4 feet on each side. Okay. And it's moved a little bit, too.
Yes, we moved it a little bit to the west as we discussed closing off that west entrance, the driveway there.
So what is, not seeing it, what does it do to that line of sight?
Haven't seen that site plan, so I don't know.
That would be
And,
my
and that's
concern.
probably just one where I think we're probably heading in a good direction on how it helps the flow of the parking lot, but we just haven't reviewed it as staff.
Will you
with
go
the
back to the
specific
site
changes.
plan? I know it's not exactly this site plan, but. So, are you done, by the way, Lyle?
Yes.
Okay. And do you have anything else to say?
I don't have anything else. If you
Okay.
don't have questions
I'm just
for me.
wondering if I can start jumping in.
Thanks.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Okay. So, is this a curb cut right here, Lyle?
It is an existing curb cut, yes.
And then there's a curb cut here.
Correct. So there are 3 curb cuts on the property, one on the far west, one as you pointed out, and another near the far east edge.
Yeah.
And so traffic currently can come in and flow out in the circular pattern. It also currently can flow around in this direction. What they're speaking about is essentially closing off this curb cut. They've seen some problems that's created, it sounds, in just their day-to-day experience of watching traffic function in their lot.
Well, it might conflict here with this, and if UDOT. Wait, is this a UDOT road right here?
200 north at that point is a city street.
It ends right at Main Street?
Yeah.
Correct.
So I guess I'm not going to assume, maybe I'm not accurate. If we could close off some of these curb cuts, we would, but I know our hands are probably somewhat tied. But because really, this is one way coming this way and one way going that way. And in the plan we're seeing, this is moved over to about right here. And I'm just slightly troubled by the placement of it. I don't really have a problem with the electronic messaging or the elevation of the sign. It's just where do we place it, because it disrupts the flow. Because right now, it wouldn't happen all the time, but if you close that off, I guess that's one thing, and then this becomes a one-way dead end, which is tricky.
Right.
But if you leave it open, then a car could come out in here, flip it around in there, and then that's just what would happen. Cars would. Now, it may not happen very often, I get it.
Yeah.
But they would drive out here, hurry and drive into this around that sign.
Yeah, it would probably
Because
require.
now they would do it right, they would go right there right now.
Right. we would probably require the elimination of a couple stalls to
Yeah.
create that circulation.
So that they
on
can
the
come
north
in
end of
right
the
here.
sign.
Oh, okay. That makes more sense.
So again, we're kind of on the fly, so
Yeah.
we've not reviewed it internally and looked at all those details based on that proposal, but knowing those concerns and the comments, we can make sure to come back to address those items.
So is there I'm trying to picture, is there a curb on the west property border?
Yes,
there?
There is.
This.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's the wall.
Actually, like the wall.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Can't go over it.
So you can't go, so, yeah.
Just to remind you, the conditional use permit is for the electronic message board. If this didn't have that element, you wouldn't even see it, and all the placement would be purely with the staff. So it's not necessary unless there's an element of the electronic message board that makes a difference for you to solve that
So
problem.
the placement of the sign is really not before us, is what you're saying.
That's correct, yeah.
So when I said I don't have a problem with the sign, I should have just ended it right there.
That's right. The rest is all free time.
Okay, and then so let the record reflect that I did end it right there. For me personally, at least.
So do we ask a question about the line of sight with the neighboring exit entrance? Like, does that sign make it hard for people to see westbound traffic on 200 North?
So it could, and not knowing the specific measurements, it's closest to the inbound lane, which doesn't use that view, so you're pushing that view distance over to the
Out, yeah.
and I suppose there's a three-lane there, one that goes straight out, and one that's just a turn only. So, yeah, we've not measured those distances and looked at the side angles.
So is that something the staff will take into account as when you talk about placement? Okay.
But yeah, to Andy's point, within the ordinance, conditional use, as part of the conditional use review, the Planning Commission may consider hours of operation, sign height, sign size, and or setbacks from property lines. So some of that location can come into play if it's linked to that specific use of the electronic message portion of the sign. So yeah, if there are reasons to believe that impacts that even further than a typical standard, then we can link that to a condition.
So are you with?
I'm with the Franklin Group. My name is Marino Taladas. I'm partners with Shelley, and I can explain now. The west approach is 16 feet wide. The one next to it is 34 feet wide. You could move the parking spaces that way if the west approach needed to be closed. I just thought I'd point that out. Then the east approach is roughly about 35, 40 feet up here. So there's a lot of possibilities about how the traffic flow is going to go in there. Just moving those stalls that way would allow traffic to go either way if you wanted an approach closed.
Okay.
I just thought I'd point that out.
I
Thank you.
appreciate that. Yeah. Sounds like we'll let the staff take care of the access part of it and the location of the sign, and we need to worry about in the years about this electronic messaging part of it. And the past issues, we've really worried about distraction and residential light pollution, that kind of thing.
Blinking lights, how long the message can change, how frequently they can change, that sort of stuff, right?
Which side of the sign is electronic? The south side of the sign? Or the
Both
north
of them
side?
would have the electronic component on it. So, which side faces the? I believe the side that faces the street would have the changing center, and then the fixed cabinet would be on the north end of the sign.
Okay.
And then, I don't think it was what you were asking, but both sides of the sign would have both of those types of cabinets.
Wait, so which side, is this the electronic message or is this?
The eagle is the electronic message
Right.
portion, and that's closest to the street.
Closest to the street.
Closest to the street.
Okay. So this would be the east elevation.
Yes.
Yes.
Do we have we over the years do we have concerns about electronic messaging? Seems like.
Just as long as it's not Vegas, I guess.
Okay. We'll take a motion if we're ready.
I'll go go ahead and make a motion that would grant a conditional use permit for electronic message sign center for Wasatch Signs Franklin Group at 69 East, 200 North, with a condition that meets the standards for Title 1738 standards, and that the sign or landscape improvements be closer than 14 feet from the back of the sidewalk, or no sign be closer.
Can I?
Do you want to come forward?
And I have a question on that too.
I don't know if I'll get that far on this stand here. The only question I had on this was, there's lights in the front of that building now, and I live very close to it. It's really bright. If they're going to add signage and have both sides, what's the regulation that tells us what's going to be there? That could, if it's like what's out of the building, that's really bright.
Could you get back on the other one, pull it out so we can see how close the houses are to it?
Yes, and
got one of those, because I thought that we
probably the
were
location, right?
safe for probably about half a block or so.
Yeah, so the closest house on this image is now gone, but just right next to it, to the south and the east, are residential homes off the corner of 100 East and 200 North. Just to speak to the question, and again, the commission can determine whether it's sufficient or not. One of the standards in our ordinance is to that concern that the electronic message sign shall not cause glare, rapid blinking, or be so intensely lighted as to create a nuisance or hazard to vehicular traffic, pedestrians, or adjacent properties. They must be capable of being programmed to automatically dim according to ambient light conditions. So there are some standards that are required already out of the ordinance that will help with that a little bit. Clearly, however, it is new light, and it would change the impact on that. So if it's, again, based on concerns from the public, if it's, there could be other conditions that the Planning Commission could impose on that to help mitigate that.
Yeah, and I think we've done that before. It seemed like we did that with a couple of schools where we had it dim after a certain hour, so as to not
I
create
think
any
in
of that
most
light
of those circumstances, though, those were people living directly
Yeah,
across the
living
street
directly
from the
across
sign.
and next to it. So
This appears to be several hundred yards away.
So does the ordinance say that it must be dimmed, or just must be capable of dimming?
It says it must be capable of dimming, and then if issues arise, we may have to address those more specifically. I've yet to deal with that with the business, but that was one of the reasons we wanted that in there, is if a problem came up, we could tell them, hey, you need to turn it down to this time, and work with them on doing that. That could be a condition that it be dimmed at a specific time, but most of them do it with light sensors or a software program, depending on the time of year, time of day, determines how much light's produced.
So if a residence, so if we can approve it as is, and a residence finds that it's annoying, and they come and talk to the staff, does the staff then reach out to the applicant and say dim it, or do we have to go through some sort of modification of the conditional use, or how does that work?
Yeah, the initial step would be to work with staff. We would work with the property owner to hopefully get some quick resolution. Assuming that doesn't occur and there's a continued perceived or real conflict with the requirement that it not create that nuisance, then it could come back to the Planning Commission for either revisions or revocation.
Yeah, okay.
Because there are no other lit signs along 2nd North yet, right?
Walgreens has one. It's the big pole sign in the corner, and it has an electronic message, an older one, so it's probably capable of less than this one would be. That's a pretty tall one. On the south side of the street, other than like open signs and doors or things, I'm not familiar with any that are electronic. 7-Eleven's old sign was the big one that was right on the corner. That's not currently up, but that's give or take the signage in the area.
So my questions were two questions, actually. One of them was the staff report, and Gary's motion was about, or mentioned that it'd be no closer than 14 feet from the back of sidewalk, but that was as it was proposed. Now it's changed, right? So it's actually closer.
That recommendation was based off the initial proposal.
So the way it's proposed now, it's like right next to the sidewalk. See that? Whereas before you were saying it had to be like back
it's
here.
14 feet based on.
So back to sidewalk now, that's like 2 feet or less.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, 2
it's
feet.
probably 2 feet 24 inches. Okay. Well,
So-
I'd amend that, withdraw that last portion of it, but it has to meet.
This.
Yeah, that, and then also based on staff's research to make sure it meets the side triangle and all the standards of 17-30-8.
And then my last comment is Walgreens electronic message, is that 24/7? Does it turn off? I don't know.
I believe it's 24/7. I could be wrong. I'm not personally aware of the specific.
How close do you live to it? Where are you in location of this?
Where's the house? South of Sam's
Right there. And are you saying that there in the windows there's electronic message signs already?
I just wanted to emphasize that I'm not opposed to the sign, but I don't see where you have an unlimited wattage. Crank those signs up like the one at the dance studio and the east end of that building, and it's bright.
Yeah, so is there a sign in the window right here?
Yeah.
Okay. And his staff, is that permitted, or how is that addressed?
I don't know if it's an open, closed sign. I don't know if it. I'd have to look at it specifically. I'm not sure what's being referred to. If it's one that falls under the CMC category, or if it's just.
I believe they're just spotlights on a sign on the building.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, and then to maybe address your question, the city code already addresses, I think, your question, and it says that electronic message center signs shall not cause glare or rapid blinking or be intensely lighted so as to create a nuisance or hazard to vehicular traffic, pedestrians, or adjacent properties. So if it gets too bright, then as with anything, any city code, citizens can come and complain to the city, and then the city addresses it.
That's what I'd recommend with this, is we see how it does, and hopefully that line of sight from where that sign's at, more on the west end, wouldn't be a nuisance, but if it does become a nuisance, to bring that back in.
So then my second and last question was, hold on, it'll come back. Do we want to set a time frame on it? That's why I was asking about Walgreens. If Walgreens is 24/7, then I don't know that we need to stop this one.
I feel we let it ride, and then if there's a concern and some of the surrounding neighbors or bring back, then we can modify it. But
I think actually being an electronic sign gives us more control.
Yeah.
Because
Yes.
of this, they could have put a sign up with, the biggest lights you can imagine, and we couldn't really do anything about it from our standpoint. This allows us to say, you've got to follow these specific rules, and if it's a problem, it'll come back before us.
But that means we'd have to modify the conditional use. Is that correct?
If they don't work it out. That's what I was asking about earlier. They could come and a resident should express some concern. They could talk to the property owner and get it solved.
So, Marino, let me ask you a question then. Would you be opposed to it dimming after a certain hour?
That wouldn't be a problem for me. The glass company and the substation pretty well block any of the north side of my property being affected by the sign. I just didn't want an open-ended sign sitting that close to my place that's that bright.
Okay, and then to Marino, would you be opposed to dimming after a certain hour?
It has those features in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's
what,
easy to-
would 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, what's the?
So 9 would work for you, Marino?
Works for us.
Okay.
That seems reasonable. We'll see if
Okay. Well, with
Okay,
that,
you
then
almost got your motion
I'm
finished.
almost there. This is the longest motion I've ever had. So.
Longest motion yet.
So let me start it over then.
You could say that one fails for lack of a second.
It never made it through, yeah. Recommend approval of conditional use permit for an electronic message sign center for Wasatch Signs and Franklin Group at 69 East, 200 North, with the condition that it meets all the standards of 17-30-8 and that that it be dimmed after 9 o'clock p.m. Does that meet it?
Till
Well, probably till maybe 7 a.m.
Very
I didn't think about the morning, so
it's got to be undimmed, right?
yeah, undimmed. So I'd say 7.
Okay,
Yeah.
that sounds like a motion finished.
I'll second that.
Aye.
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 Okay. Next is a public hearing for the rezone of .25 acres of property at 425 East Crestwood Road from R18 to PU, public use at, the address there.
Okay, so the city owns the home that's on the far southwest corner of the cemetery. Has for some time, has just been leasing it for use as a dwelling. Recently, the tenant that was living there is no longer there, so it's swatched hand. It's now vacant. And the Parks Department that maintains and operates the cemetery is looking at that as an opportunity to provide better services to the users of the cemetery and the city and function better as staff. And so for that, they're looking at turning the home essentially into a cemetery office. And to accommodate that, we're proposing the PU zone. It's a public use zone, essentially for public entities. Cemetery itself, as you can see in the zoning map, is already zoned a part of the public use. So both city or public offices and cemetery uses are allowed in this zone. So we're just looking for the zoning district to accommodate that. We do have a representative here from the Parks Department, the cemetery sexton, that also, if there's any questions on the use of the specific site, we'd be happy to address with you. And hopefully it's about that simple. I'll conclude there and turn it back to the Planning Commission.
Okay, so we'll open the hearing on this. Is there anyone here from the public that would like to speak on this item? Okay, we'll close the public hearing. Is there any discussion? We keeping the same building?
Trent, maybe I'll speak a little bit more to that. So there are some issues with the existing building, and so they're currently looking at it as to what type of remodeling or rehab, please come up, could be done. So I think determining and pending those results will dictate what happens with the building.
Okay.
So what questions do you have?
Just state your name, please. And
Trent Walker, Cemetery Sexton.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I just was curious about what was going to happen with the building.
So our intents are to turn it into an office and to basically take those responsibilities from here and move them up to the existing house. But there will be some renovation that will take place so that we can have a conference room and then we can have patrons come in and discuss funeral services that will be taking place there at the cemetery.
Where is that? Is that done somewhere else now?
Currently it's being done here at City Hall.
Oh, okay.
So you'd be open like over Memorial Day?
We'll just regular business hours.
I mean, sometimes it's helpful to be open and help people locate.
I'm sure that we could look at that and entertain that. I mean, we do have services, and we do, a public event that day, a memorial service at the cemetery that day. So.
Okay.
I mean, our intent, we just see that it'll be very beneficial. We'll be right there. We know that other cities are doing this currently. Brigham City did this. I've gone down to Provo. They did this also. They acquired property down there, about 12 acres. And that 12 acres in which they acquired had a house on it, and they did this very same thing. They renovated that existing house upon that purchase of those 12 acres, and it has been very beneficial to have an office there with a sexton there, and those who work at the cemetery, an area where they can take break, and an area where they can facilitate and maintain their vehicles and whatnot there at the cemetery. And to the point that they've actually purchased a golf cart in which they take people who have come in to purchase plots and go and show them where they are, or options, give them a scenario. We have these available and these ones, and it's been very beneficial that way.
That's good.
Okay. Any other questions, discussion? Thank you.
I'll just, so.
Is he done?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Now are we good?
Yeah, go ahead.
So,
Your thing.
I just, I'll comment on how we approach rezones. We look at the general plan, and we say, is this proposed zone compatible with the general plan? And I think this one is. For example, in the staff report, it references some applicable provisions being most public buildings should be located near Main Street. Well, that says most. This one's not near Main Street, but I think it's a logical exception to that. So that one's fine. Adequate cemetery facilities should be developed and maintained. I think this one makes sense as far as that goes as well. It doesn't affect the character of the neighborhood. It's probably going to look like it's not like you're going to tear the building down, is that right? Just renovate it?
It's the current plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, the current plan is to renovate the inside to make it more accommodating. Obviously, it has 3 bedrooms and a bathroom, and there's going to be some renovation that will need to be taken place in order to make it, public accessible. Bathrooms will have to, be ADA accessible and various things like that, which will meet the building codes and requirements here at the city. But the exterior itself, we'll do some landscaping to tie in with the existing landscaping at the cemetery itself, so it would cosmetically just look as if it was always there.
I assume you're adding additional parking, though?
Additional parking, yes, will take place there east of the house itself.
Yeah. So for those reasons, I think it makes sense to rezone this, to recommend a rezone. And if that sounded like a motion, I will go ahead and make it a motion.
Go ahead.
That's my motion.
Okay. So we're looking for a second.
I'll second that.
Aye.
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 Great. Okay. Number 5. Public hearing and request to rezone 0.59 acre of property at 146 East 200 North from RD, diverse residential, to PB, professional business, for James and Weston Ridd.
Okay. By way of introduction, we're busy in this part of the community, so here's another one that's close by, just east of us, off of 200 North. The property currently in the RD's district, it's residential diverse, primarily the existing zoning. History on it, it's a pretty diverse neighborhood and zoning district. You see single-family, duplexes, fourplexes, apartments throughout. Long story short, and eventually the residents in the area said, okay, that's enough. Anything that's new needs to be single-family. So other than what's existing, it's essentially a single-family zoning district for any new construction and development. The property proposed is looking for the PB, or professional business zoning district. The purpose of that, stated in the staff report, states that provide for offices in which intensity of use, terms of hours and operation, and the number of customers is less than that of a commercial zone. And the PB zoning district may be applied to properties that front Main Street or 200 North. So technically it's eligible to do that, but as mentioned from Commissioner Sunloff on the previous consideration, because it's a rezone, as a planning commission, you're making a recommendation, you get to consider case by case, how does it meet with the general plan in whole, how does it work in the specific neighborhood at the specific location. The review on staff consideration, so speaking with the applicant when this initially came in, didn't have a a clear set specific user or known use for the property. In staff's opinion, because of how many residential properties this fronts, whatever the Planning Commission decides, if it feels appropriate to head towards the PB zoning district, we would recommend that it be done under a specific development agreement, knowing the specific uses and how that would affect the specific property. Otherwise, the Planning Commission, again, may recommend that with different changes or to recommend denial. Ultimately, the City Council would get to make that call. It is a public hearing. I'll turn it back to the chair to open up for that and, again, be available for question. And I do know the applicants are here this evening as well to represent any other information or answer questions you may have.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, we'll open the public hearing. If you are here to speak on this item, please come forward and state your name and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Appreciate it.
I recognize quite a few people here that are affected by this particular area. And by way of introduction, my name is Roberta Crookston. I live on 2nd North and 2nd East. I'm the second house in from the corner of 2nd North. And kind of by way of an introduction, a while back, many years back, when Carol Page was in the group, so to speak, and talk about planning, they had an offer before them to put more apartments into this area of town, right there by 2nd North and 2nd East, and up a little bit and down a little bit, block-wise. And in the notes, and I believe I can still come up with a copy of those, she basically said, we realize that this violates the charter of Kaysville. However, since the school is so close, we're going to ignore that and go ahead and grant this permission. And I'm almost worried that this is the same kind of a situation, because we've been here twice before to protest the creep of businesses and the changing of areas in this area to that. I almost feel like I'm going to be the little guy in Up, and I'm looking around and saying, whoa, what happened, you know? It's creeping up there. I thought that we had a charter written after that, or a revision to a charter, that said that Fairfield was the cutoff line. Now, is that not so on the business?
I don't know what it said.
That above Fairfield, there would not be business zoning. Now, that was my understanding of that charter, and we had a discussion about that with Flint's lot that's down there on the corner, because here's Fairfield, and that particular lot jogs right there where Fairfield was, and there was a problem with it. I don't know if any of you were here and remember that or not, but I would recommend we check into the charter and see if we are voiding that charter by doing so. I would go on record as saying I am against, on that between 2nd East and 1st East, putting it into business property. It creeps. It's creeped in on that corner where we had the discussion before, and now there is the little duplex that's there, and now they want to put the next one up closer to my house in business too. I don't want business next to my house. I don't want to look out and see businesses. Wald is nice. He said, oh, as long as you keep your lights down, it's okay. But it's not okay for me, and it's not okay when I think of all the kids that cross that street, whether it's a dental office or whatever it be. Something else is going to creep in with it. Like I say, my first question is, have we voided the charter by even entertaining something like this on that block? Unless they changed it since the last time I looked at things, we are. And it is a problem. And I talked to several of my neighbors. I got a little thing in the mail that warned me this was coming. And I said, well, Sherry and Alan, did you get one? Beth and Bill up here on 2nd North, did you get one? And they're all going, what are you talking about? And Beth's going, I saw that yellow sign and I kept meaning to walk by it and see what it was. But,
Okay.
you know.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure there was a lot of publication on it. But the ones I did talk to were very anti putting business on that block. Okay. And it is next to a school. And like I say, I think it's in breaking that charter that we thought we had.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate your input.
Could I just ask, Lyle, is there anything in the plan about the extent of business zoning?
Yeah, so what I assume, I'm not familiar with our other specific charters, so the best to my knowledge that would address that is the city's general plan, which has changed over the years, but in essence is a lot of things are very similar. It's not that specific as to where business starts and stops. Right. It speaks mainly to businesses would be located along major streets. The character of Kaysville is primarily residential, and there are a couple other references outlined there, but I think anecdotally there's probably been a lot of discussion, and historically that's kind of been a line, but I'm not sure of any documents that state that's where it must stay.
Okay.
Anyone else here to speak on this item?
My name's Walt Meacham. I live the first house that we said there south of Sanders Glass. And my understanding is that the zoning line now goes down the center of the street on Second North. And I live in a home that's 120 years old and work tirelessly to try to keep it looking, good and being an asset. I just feel like that changing that to commercial, and I assume that PB is where the extension would be for the zone.
I think that's existing, right? The Utah shape looking, that's the
We're talking about right there. And what would that zone change do to the use of my property?
No, I can answer that if the commission would desire. So it affects only the specific property as far as what uses are allowed or what may change. How it would affect surrounding properties would be the way they interact with that changed use on the specific lot.
So you'd take care of me?
I'm not sure I understand the specific question, but they're not asking to rezone anyone else's land, just this one piece of property is what's under consideration tonight, and it would be the only one that, again, the Planning Commission's only recommendation, but should it go all the way to the council for approval, technically a change would only be applicable to their lot. So if we need to discuss it further, I'm happy to do that as well after the meeting, if you have other questions.
I feel a little remiss that I haven't been down and talked to somebody so that I had a better knowledge of what I was talking about, but I am concerned with what we're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So we got an email from somebody, and they said it was 145 East, 100 North. Is that the property in the middle between the two, between the
It's like one
currents?
of these.
Okay.
Somewhere in that.
Oh, that's right. Okay. Yeah.
I think it
south end, down by St. George there.
That's worth noting that we did get those 2 emails from residents in the area objecting to the rezone.
I'm Weston Ridd. I'm representing that property. I just want to address the concerns that have been had here. And one of the things that we were looking at with this is, as everyone knows, 200 North has become a very busy road, very well traveled. And as you know, as a father myself of young children, I would be concerned living on that road and having my children playing out near that road. And that is one of the things I considered in this property. One of the initial considerations was to rent it out as a residential property. But as we looked at things and the desire of someone to rent a space that is near a busy road, our considerations changed. And the other consideration we had is we really like the home. It's a cute little, if you haven't driven by, it's a cute little cottage home. And we wanted to preserve that home on the property and be able to use it as something that would be aesthetically pleasing to the neighborhood, and keep it. And as the professional business states, I believe, I'm not completely versed in that, but I believe the professional business states that it has to be some kind of a professional business, meaning attorney, CPA, something of that nature. So the hours would be reasonable. There would not be a lot of traffic at an office like that. And certainly a lot less potential for after-hours parties or things like that that would go on at potentially a place of residence. So in order to kind of preserve that quiet nature of Kaysville 200 North there, but also create a way for it not to be a dangerous place for residents to rent and kids to play out on a busy street, we felt this would be a good way to impact that property along that street. So I just want to address those concerns. So thank you.
So I have a question.
Thank
so
you.
Do you live there currently? Or?
I don't live there currently. I do live on 100 North, so I'm not too far away from there.
So, but is there somebody living there in that?
Not currently.
Not currently. And you don't have any specific use or any kind of specific business or anything that's coming in at this point?
No. The thoughts were something like an attorney or a CPA is the thought we were moving towards. So.
Okay, thank you.
What's the work going on in the backyard right now?
Clearing out. It's been pretty much a forest. It's been really overgrown and neglected, as Lyle could attest to. He's been over there multiple times, but it's been very overgrown and just gotten out of control. So we've been cleaning up the backyard, cleaning up the property, making it look, and getting it ready to fence in and just cleaning up the property in general.
So there was I don't know who said it or if it's true. Well, I guess I'm going to ask if it's true, but there was a rumor about there's going to be some sort of construction material storage or construction yard going to be going on in that backyard there. And if I understood you correctly, the answer to that is no.
That's correct. That's correct.
So what's the vision for that backyard? That's pretty big backyard for CPAs to play in.
Well,
lots of parking.
It could, for now, it's going to be fenced in and maintained. It could be additional parking for the professional business, but there's no specific use in mind at this point.
Right.
So. Any other questions?
Nope. Any other questions? Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else here as part of the public hearing? Okay, we'll close the public hearing.
I have a couple questions on with this. I mean, if it were considered and a development agreement was put in place, because once we changed the zoning, you could tear the house down and build a new building, but you said you wanted to preserve the home. is that a condition that could be placed in a general, or in a development agreement? That no storage, no warehousing, they have to maintain the existing structure?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can get very creative on the items that are listed in the agreement. Assuming both parties are amenable to that, absolutely, you could put in provisions of that nature.
Because, if I were an owner of this property and I'm looking at this coming in as a PB, I would think to myself, well, and I'm not commenting on the propriety or lack of this scenario, but hypothetically, this gets PB, and then you just update this home for a decade or something, and then this property gets rezoned PB, and then this one does, and then this one does, and in 20 years you now have a big square of a PB zone where there's some professional offices. I think we have to consider that that's a possibility if we rezoned this, and the question obviously is, do we want that possibility to happen, or do we want to stop it here?
Good point. I do remember when we were talking about the general plan a few years ago, talking about 200 North being a major road, and there was a discussion on how far do we allow that. I remember one resident said, "God, you could go all the way up to 89." And I think you're right, Lyle. From what I recall, I don't have it in front of me, but I don't think we did set an east and west boundary on that. Of where that would go, but be case by case, and if it meant the general plan, which also includes the surrounding neighborhood. And that PB's kind of encroached a little bit, and I do worry about that in the future. I don't think 100 East is a road that I personally would consider a major road or thoroughfare through there. But there is concern about that kind of becoming that down the road.
Can I ask how long ago that corner piece was rezoned to PB?
Not very long ago, actually. We had the same conversation.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think it would be actually interesting to see the minutes. I think we said, well, let's kind of stop it there. I don't think we drew a hard line in the sand, but we were concerned that that's as far as it should go, and now here we are leapfrogging it a little bit more.
Something that came to mind as we do the general plan, it would be nice to have a lot of public input as we redo and get public opinion. I don't know how long that would take. There's not specific needs for it right now. That could be something, and see how far up we want to go with that.
Yeah, that general plan, it actually went on for several years from the first time we started discussing it again. As I recall, it kind of got put on hold and then kind of revitalized a couple of years later, then went through. I want to be pro-business, but it needs to be smart growth, and it needs to fit within the character of Kaysville and the character of the neighborhoods and the right place. And the problem is it's right there to where, you look at it and logically you'd go, okay, you got a house in between, but then how far do you go? And I'm a little leery about extending that, especially where there's not a use, and once you zone it, it's hard to take it back.
It's interesting. Was it just our last commission meeting where we were wringing our hands over sacrificing commercial and turning it into residential?
Yes.
And the argument was commercial doesn't work there, residential does. And now here we are on the other side of town where you can see, kind of the natural growth of business up 200 North. And I think if you anticipate with I forget what the name of it is, with the new freeway coming in and 200 North being exit, it'll probably be more that way. So
Maybe
it's
even
kind
with
of
89, when
and
that's
89 is going
redone,
to expand.
yeah, this is going to become a busier street than it already is, I think.
Yeah. Well, for sure, right? I mean, it's
I'm not sure it will because there isn't going to be an interchange on Crestwood. Well, there will be a 200 North.
200 North, right?
Yeah, so yeah, you're right. You're probably
Yeah.
right, it will be.
But we did make concession for that in the business plan, or the general plan, to allow for the growth. But again, part of it was that it still fit and met the surrounding neighborhoods. And that's why this one I'm torn. Part of me goes, it makes natural sense. But then also, we kind of did talk about where do we cut that off at the last one. And you just kind of keep encroaching a little bit, and where do you draw it?
It's hard to imagine the entire length of 200 North being commercial.
It wouldn't, and that was some of the concern, because you go up a couple blocks and the house there decides, hey, I want to do professional business, and I've got an insurance agency that wants to move in my house. Then all of a sudden you've got that clustered in, around everybody else. You go up another block, and all of a sudden you start getting them spotted throughout 200 North.
Yep.
Me personally, I'd rather, like here, I'd rather keep it kind of consolidated versus spotted throughout.
Yeah. I mean, you see plenty of streets, older streets, but busy streets that are residential.
Yeah.
They're not ideal, but they still stay residential.
Yeah.
They change, a lot of them change to higher density residential. And maybe some commercial. It kind of depends on the street. But.
And this is a way, if I'm arguing in favor of it, I would say this is a way to keep character, but also recognize the situation that it's in. And the closest example, one of the closest examples that I can think of that would match what it sounds like they're proposing here is right across from Davis High, next to Kaysville Junior High. There's that insurance agency. Mm-hmm. That is a professional office, but it looks exactly like it doesn't change the character of what it was before. So, if that were proposed here, let's just say we copied and pasted that and put it right here. Well, that's not necessarily that bad.
Yeah, that house it actually enhanced it.
Yeah, makes it it's maintained. It looks clean. It's nice. I don't think there's a whole lot of traffic for that, and depending on what goes here, it would be the same. But
I approach again. Actually, it's funny you bring that up, because that's one of the houses I was looking at as to kind of mimic this after. And I've actually talked to him about what he did and how he went about that, because that was my intention, was to take it and turn it into something that could be nicer. I mean, the house has been sitting there for quite some time. Had multiple renters within the family, but very poorly maintained all around. The yard, the house, everything was just in really bad disrepair. And so everything that I've done so far has brought it up, and we intend to even do more so that way, but just enhance the beauty of the home, and just have it be a part of the community, and not have it be this standout business. I know business always seems like it's this standout thing, that, whoa, we don't want that, but I want it to blend in and have it be, basically part of the community, like that home over there by Kaysville Junior High. So.
Now the question is, if we rezone it, how would we assure that would be the case?
Yeah,
that's the way to do that. Would
that's what I was
some
asking.
kind of a development agreement
if we required him to preserve it.
Yeah.
I guess if you look at the pros and cons on this, they've kind of been addressing both. But some of the pros, I guess, if I were to hit the pros first, is if we preserve it and enhance it, it actually dresses it up, it cleans it up. It is taking something that's kind of been a little neglected and brings it up. Your business hours are usually during days 8 to 5, 8 to 6, somewhere around there. So your traffic's not going to be in the evenings. You're not going to have, it's going to be a quiet neighbor, basically, in the evenings when people are trying to settle down. Your vehicular traffic in and out is going to probably stay on 200, and you're not going to probably get much through traffic that's going to be coming into a business, along 100 North, 100 East. On the cons, if we don't set some boundaries on that, they end up building a new building that doesn't fit the character of it, then it doesn't fit the neighborhood. If that back becomes a big parking lot, then that kind of takes away from the character. And if it becomes used, a lot of cars start parking there, it becomes storage, does detract from it. And then also it sets kind of, which could be a pro or con how you look at it. If it sets kind of a precedent for that northwest corner of that block, and then how far does it go? So I guess when I'm looking at there are pros and cons to both, and
could you point out the sign that we just approved? Is it right across the street from that?
It would be located here.
Kitty corner. Down.
The library building sits here on this corner, and this is the Franklin Group, building.
Andy, do you know, are there any plans to widen or make changes to Second North in the near future?
Currently, they're not. We think Second North is at its current design width.
Okay.
It'd be hard.
It'd be hard.
I'm just wondering, with the comments about increased traffic due to the changes to Highway 89, if there's plans to do anything with Second North either.
Not down here, up at the top, where it's not fully improved. Certainly that's on the list. Down in this area, there's no plans to widen Second North.
Is it wide enough that it could be striped for 4 lanes?
Could possibly go to 4. It's not big enough east of Main Street to go to 5.
Our public hearing's closed, but you're welcome to make a statement if you're ready to go. Come on up.
Sorry. My name is Ralph Lewis. I'm actually the property owner right next door to that one.
To the west?
To the east. I'm the one who has the 2 little duplexes that are there. I guess I'd like to speak in favor of the change. What we saw with that property prior to Mr. Rudd taking that over was a situation where there were a lot of raccoons, there were deer running through that property as well as through my gardens and my back lawns and so forth. Certainly rodents of various kinds because of the condition of the property. So as a neighbor, I'm thrilled to see it being cleaned up and something done about the situation that was there. My only concern, as has been expressed, is what happens to that back area. I think the initial plan with the home and some parking in behind it, if it were done nicely as a professional business, would certainly be applicable and acceptable as far as I'm concerned as a neighbor. But I think that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
I mean, if you look at it, as far as that comment, I'm assuming there's enough width to get a drive back there, right? And so, again, this is back to the question that we need to answer. There is plenty of room to put another building back here, and in a PB, could that happen? Let's say we didn't have any development agreement, we just rezoned a PB, and they just we're off to the races. Could they put another building back here? Yes.
Yeah,
okay.
so in commercial properties, we do allow multiple buildings essentially on it, whether it's another office or accessory structure, so long as they can provide the adequate parking and other necessary requirements.
See, me, I would not want to see one in that square.
Mm-hmm. And PB doesn't allow for storage.
Yeah, so all it states, extremely limited business and professional offices and accessory uses considered incidental to those business and offices. So it's highly limited. I think an accessory use, if you had a insurance office and you had a car with his insurance logo on it that you park there, that stores there all the time, I don't know. It's hard to draw a very distinct line in the sand, but it would have to be clearly secondary and incidental to the office use on site. So it can just be random storage of miscellaneous items.
And so, let's just hypothetically say there's enough. Let's say this is a professional insurance building or whatever, CPA or something that's renovated. There's enough parking. You could put parking right here for 3 or 4 cars, and then let's hypothetically say that this was developed and there was another building back here. Why would we like that, or why would we not like that?
Well, it takes away from the residential feel.
So it affects the character?
Yeah, that's what I would say.
It's just a weird property boundary. It's because that becomes kind of a hole.
It's a flag lot for a...
Well, and what I'm saying, and I think I agree with that, but what I'm also saying is, again, if I'm putting myself in the property owner's shoes, and we've never met, I don't even know what his considerations are, I'm just thinking what I would say. Okay, I'm fine to get this rezone and let this sit undeveloped, because guess what? As soon as those two have come available and I can get these two zoned PB, tear those homes down, now I got a big, nice PB lot that I can do something good here, and it fits with the character that's already there, and we just have to say, are we okay with that if this comes in?
Yeah, right. But we could do, what I'm thinking is we do a development agreement that limits it to this current configuration, and then...
So that no matter what happens with those two, they couldn't change it?
Well, unless they got a change from the planning commission.
Yeah.
Right, which would be certainly foreseeable.
If that's the way it was going. Part of what we need to figure out is this all going to go commercial?
Where do we want to draw the line, really?
Well, right.
I think that those of us who are here listening to all this ought to be sensitive to the fact that the west side of First East is already central commercial.
Right.
And that opens up all of your development doors if you're in that zone. The 120-year-old home and living in it, when I went to add on my garage, I had to go get special permission from you guys
Right.
to build on a lot that's been there for 120 years.
The current building and lot is not historical use or anything like that, right? It's not a...
So the existing building on it would just be a permitted use under the existing zone. I don't think it has a historic designation or anything with the existing home. Likely a scenario that's being referred to is an existing residence in a commercial zone is non-conforming. So when you make changes to that, unless it's going commercial, they have to come to the commission to receive approval on a modification to a non-conforming use. So there'd be 2 different scenarios. However, if you zone this and the home desires to go back to a residential use or something, that would no longer be a feasible option on the property that we're speaking of without a rezone.
Lyle, does the city have any kind of rule, or is there anything in the ordinance that prohibits splitting a property into different zones? Maybe you don't.
There's not. It's been done on occasion.
Yeah.
Would you have to replat
One
it,
property
or-
has 2 different zones?
Yeah.
One parcel?
Yeah, it happens in places. Some places don't allow it or don't encourage it, but
So that-
I'm thinking, could you go back to that aerial photo? So what if we rezone only the front part PB and leave the rest of that in the
Well, that's
PB zone?
interesting. In the residential, you mean?
And if they want to do anything back there, they have to come back and get it rezoned.
I think that's a workable option on one hand. The other hand, it's just kicking the can down the road.
Yeah, it is, no question about that.
Yeah.
Well, but it's another way to put it is that it leaves planning for when planning needs to be done, right? I think it's okay for a future planning commission to decide what's best.
But if we do that, can we only do the development agreement on the rezone piece? So that back piece, if we do that, he could just let it go wild again. Because I don't think we can set any conditions on that back piece.
We can do a development agreement on the whole piece,
Yeah.
and make limitations similar to what that
Even if
residential.
we only rezone a portion of it?
Well, no, I would say we rezone the whole thing.
Yeah.
That's what I'm.
Yeah, and that's the other, you certainly do it that way as well.
Limit it to a secondary building, and the house remains standing.
Lyle or Andy, do you have this is going to put you on the spot. Do we have a site plan of what's going in right here on the corner?
Yeah, the city does have we don't have it available to show at this time, but an approved building permit.
What's
near approved? It is a professional office for
some parking.
The ratio, or where's the parking?
So it's just like a one-story professional office.
Single-story office. Architecture, in some sense, is similar to the library. Single-story. The building is up against 200 North. Parking on the south side of the lot.
Okay.
And they've got some, opaque. Actually, it's like a concrete wall-type fence around it, and some landscaping to kind of buffer the existing residences surrounding it. And that is, the existing home, again, has already been demolished. The building permit, I apologize, I don't think it's actually been issued, but I think they've resubmitted corrections and is probably very near being issued for construction.
And then will you go back to the broader zoning map? So when you zoom in, it makes it look a little more troublesome, but when you step all the way out, making that PB doesn't seem as drastic, right? When you see all of this residential and how close this is to commercial, and I guess what I'm saying is if you look at it from that standpoint, this little section or this little corner of the section here is not, if we just say that's going to be a square of PB in the future, it doesn't seem as troublesome, but
and possibly to a relevant point to make with that, I know it's been talked about squaring that corner, and that could be accomplished in a number of ways. And of course, zoning districts change and ordinances and regulations change. The current rules state that the PB district may only be applied to Main Street or 200 North. So to apply it to properties fronting 100 East or others would simply take more creativity, I suppose you could say, or other changes, acquisition and assembly of property, or a change to the ordinance.
Yeah.
And property assemblage would be a little challenging. You'd have to get both of those, and have to go in and actually replat that whole area. And have an address of 200 North.
Yeah, if that language never changed, you could still shoehorn that in by saying this frontage would apply all the way across.
Yep. I don't. That back piece still is what bothers me. The front, I'm not opposed to, putting conditions to where it preserves the home, and they have to bring it up, and they have to maintain it and clean the back up, and just kind of enhance that so it adds to the community and the surrounding neighborhood, and the fact that the traffic's going to be minimized to pretty much daytime use. But it's that back piece that really bothers me. So I like the idea if we did it to limit any development or construction back on that.
So I'll just, I guess I'll say that I was on the fence because I could see both sides coming into this, but as we've sat here, and this is, I suppose, why we come, I've come to more of a decision, and I think I would recommend approval. Of course, it's going to be the city council who makes the ultimate decision, but I would recommend approval. Looking at the general plan, one, it says most sites used primarily for business should be located on major streets. Like we've talked, this is a major street. I don't think, especially if it stays the way that the applicant has said, it would change fundamentally the character of the neighborhood. And it said, another part of the general plan says home occupation should be located throughout the city. I don't know, this wouldn't necessarily be a home occupation, but it would function very similar to that. They should be located throughout the city, but not be allowed to change or interfere with the character of residential areas. So if we rezoned it, I would say we we, I suppose, enter a development agreement that restricts the complete redevelopment of it and makes it look more like that one we mentioned back by Kaysville Elementary, or Kaysville Junior High, excuse me. So I think it does, in my subjective opinion, adhere to the general plan, and it wouldn't change drastically the character of the neighborhood. It's not going to affect the traffic, I don't think, terribly. Certainly not more than 200 North can bear, and the neighborhood, it wouldn't, I don't even think, notice the increased traffic by this, based on what they're saying it's going to be used as. It might even, if we went to a trip generating manual, be less trips than a residential use.
Well,
so
we talked about that in the prior commission meeting, where we talked about some commercial uses are less than residential uses.
And I think this would probably be one of them, it sounds like.
Right. That's what it seems like.
Yeah. So would you be saying then that the business would be restricted, or the development agreement would say that it would be restricted to be either in the home that's there or in a structure that looks like a home?
Residential home.
So I would propose, and of course maybe the staff would craft it, that the home just stay as is but be renovated, updated to a commercial use.
I'm just thinking if
business use.
You know, if you just look at it and you say, yeah, we just can't do anything with this, we've got to rebuild. Well, if that's the case,
leave that
then
open.
rebuild it to look like a home.
Yeah, leave it open. I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to that, you know.
Yeah, it would have to look like home, because I'm kind of the same way. When I came into it, I was actually leaning more in opposition to it. Lori, look at it and kind of talk through it myself, basically. Where I'm thinking it gives us a chance to, I think, preserve some of the character by setting some of those conditions upon it, and actually help clean it up, to where if we leave it with it is, it's either going to continue to become even more blighted if it doesn't get taken care of and maintained or occupied, to where it actually becomes kind of an eyesore and a nuisance to the neighborhood. So I think I like the fact that we have the ability to set some conditions to protect the neighborhood.
So the commission obviously can make the motion and give the direction. Sounds like, at best, if an agreement's coming, would you like to see those details prior to making a recommendation?
I'm comfortable giving the staff the direction.
It has to go to the council too, anyway,
Right.
as well. So.
Okay. Should we take a motion?
I'll go ahead and take a stab at it. I recommend that we recommend approval for the rezone of 0.59 acres of property at 146 East, 200 North, from an RD to a PB zoning, with the conditions that a development agreement be put in place, which requires the home to be maintained and brought up to codes if it needs, and that no development be allowed on the back southern portion of the property.
Other than maybe allowable accessory structures.
Secondary buildings is what you were talking
Yeah,
about?
yeah.
Is that terminology that works? Just call it a secondary building?
So secondary or accessory structures could be developed on the back?
Could not.
Like a garage or a shed or something like that.
Yeah, that's right.
That's
That
permitted
is
in the zone already.
Yeah. So that'd be permitted. Okay.
And then just to clarify,
friendly.
Yeah, just clarify. When you say that the home be maintained, you mean that the essential structure and character not be modified.
Correct.
Beyond recognition when it gets renovated.
Yes, that maintains the character of it.
What about Wilf's scenario where the building doesn't work, but they rebuild a new one that looks like a residential feel? Too loose for you?
Yeah, I think that as they go through it, they find that there's just so many code violations or deterioration of the home that it's
or I'm thinking even that
uninhabitable.
you might get a business in there that says, yeah, we'd love to be here, but we can't make this house work without, like, essentially completely rebuilding it. If you're going to rebuild it, then make it look like a house.
Yeah, because I want it to maintain that look. I want it to
So
maintain
the
the
question
look.
is
So
that that house or a house?
I'd say a house.
Yeah.
that the house be preserved as much as is practical, and if it is redeveloped or built, a new home built, that it still maintains a residential feel and character to the surrounding neighborhood.
I like that.
Second.
Work.
Tom, you're the-
Nay.
Aye.
They're coming.
Aye.
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 Aye. Okay, thank you all for your input. I appreciate it. It's very helpful.
And for those residents who are here, just of interest, so this one, in order to put together an agreement, the council is not meeting their second meeting in October for fall break. So it would probably be November before it's in front of the council for a final determination, just based on timing and process. So anyone who's interested.
Thank you. Next, amendment of section 173125, telecommunication towers, together with amendments applicable zoning districts within Title 17. To clarify where tower types may be located and by which process they may be considered.
So, Mr. Chair, if I might, up to the chairs, I think the remaining individuals who are here, at least I recognize two of them, are here in regards to the training component. So I don't know if you'd be interested in entertaining that first, probably a 15, 20-minute give or take discussion, and we could move on to this afterward, unless I'm incorrect and there are individuals interested in this
item. Is anybody here to address the item number 6? Okay. You don't have to lean away. I can kind of see him anyway. So. That's fine with me. We'll move the agenda item up.
Well, so we had a request from the Planning Commission. We appreciate when you individuals do that and let us know what you have interest in learning more about or understanding better, and frankly, that helps us as well as staff. So based on your input, we've asked Carlos Garcia, someone that I see on occasion at the Kaysville business meetings, who's works in real estate here in the area, has agreed to come and share some insight on the age-old question of how does new development impact property values on existing neighborhoods. Hopefully we've given him enough framework to directly address your questions, but we'll let him come up, and he's probably got some information and items to share. Then I believe we would expect some back and forth and question and answered, depending what you have as a commission. So Carlos, if you'd like to come up, we appreciate you coming and glad to have you.
Okay. Yeah, kind of, yeah. Is there something? I emailed it to you as well, if not. That way, unless we plug it in here. But
our system doesn't like Apple, so
I knew it.
We'll find the email here.
Okay, so I might have to have you toggle back and forth to my PDFs as well on there. My name's Carlos Garcia. My wife, Allison Garcia. We're a team here in Kaysville. We live here in Kaysville, just on the west side on Country Mill Drive. So we're very familiar with the area, very familiar with Kaysville and how things, the values work around here, because it affects us personally as well. And we own a home in Fruit Heights as well, so we're very well, versed in the area here. But just a little background on me. Allison has been a real estate agent for 12 years now. I've had my license for 8. I've been in the industry in mortgages and banking. I've got an MBA from the University of Phoenix as well. So I really enjoy learning about how the real estate process works, how values work, how comparables work, how the banking and lending institutions work in this process. So some of the information I have is probably stuff you guys already know. So I've already talked to Josh a little bit, and it's pretty much the same thing you guys know. But let's see here. So appraisers, were you able to find it?
We're getting very close.
Oh,
yeah.
cool. Okay.
I'll get it up here.
So anyway, appraisers, they determine value on different by different means. They look at pretty much they look at like homes. So when they say like homes, comparables, they're looking for homes that are similar in size, in age, in for instance, ramblers. They compare ramblers to ramblers. They compare 2 stories to 2 stories. They compare twin homes to twin homes. They'll look for condos and townhomes. They'll compare condos to condos. So when you're developing dealing with So when you're dealing with comparing larger homes to smaller homes to larger developments, it all depends on what homes are going in next to these larger homes. So from my understanding, you guys are thinking, maybe 1 acre lots are going to have maybe 1/4 acre lots next to some of these homes. So the concern from residents could be that it's going to affect the value of their home, if that's my understanding. So that they're worried that these smaller homes are going to affect how their homes are portrayed or whatnot. Usually, it doesn't affect their value. It's going to affect more their market value depending on what type of homes you put next to those $1 million homes. So if you're putting condos next door to $1 million homes, it doesn't necessarily affect the value of the home. It affects the market value, which they may need to lower the price because it may be perceived that condos bring in lower income and maybe more crime or more maintenance issues or things like that. So in that case, it could affect the value that way. But if you're looking at bringing in 1/4 acre homes, 1/3 acre lot homes, where the price point isn't such that it's a big deal, it's really not going to affect it because appraisers are looking more for comparables within like a mile radius of the home. If they can't find a comparable within a mile radius, they go even further out. They look for other areas that are the other homes that are similar. If they still can't find a comparable that's similar to that house, then they also will go to maybe they'll compare a rambler to a 2-story if it's similar in that neighborhood. So that's how the appraisers will look at things. They also will take into account, depending on if it's on a busy road or if it's close to the railroad, if it's closer to that will affect the value. But where you're comparing homes to homes, it's not really going to affect as much. So I did an interview with an appraiser a year and a half ago. That he kind of explains it as well. I didn't know if you wanted me to play that for you, and that way you can kind of get a second opinion from what he is talking about. Oh,
that's me here. I apologize.
It's just a portion of the interview I did with him.
Comparables. Tell us about that, what that means when you're looking at homes in your own neighborhood. People are going to want to compare their homes to others that are in the neighborhood. We get all the time as realtors, my neighbor just sold theirs down the street for $50,000 more than what you're telling me might cost. Tell us how that could be. Why, what would an appraiser look at as a comparable? Yeah, that's a great question too. And this is about realtors with CMAs as well. We're looking at, we want to stay within 10 to 15% of the home square footage. I'm talking about above grade levels 1 and 2 if there's a second level. Above grade 10 to 15, and I have this ideal situation, assuming there's a lot of comparables around. We want to look at 10 to 15% either side of the square footage. We're looking for the same design. If it's a rambler home, 1-level home, we're looking for other 1-level homes. If it's a 2-story home, we're looking for other 2-story homes. And then we're looking for the age of the property. Usually want to go 5 to 10 years on either side of the house that we're appraising. And then the last thing is the lot size. We want to keep that consistent as well. Okay. So you're comparing apples to apples. You're not comparing a rambler with a 2-story home or another home that maybe is older or compared to a newer one. Yeah, in most situations. I mean, on other appraisals where there's no comparables around, in that immediate area, we do have to change that with expensive parameters. But in an ideal situation, those are the things that we're looking for. And you measure for the square footage to take that into account, the difference of what the value could be, right? Yeah, that's right. We measure, on a full appraisal, we measure the outside of the house to find out what the exact square footage is on each level. Okay, great.
So, like you kind of mentioned, you're looking for the same lot sizes. So if you're putting in a 3rd-acre lot next to an acre lot or a half-acre lot, usually they're going to try to find homes that are similar in size as the lot size as well. So taking that into account, it's not going to affect people's houses. And being in the mortgage industry as I was before, I looked at hundreds and hundreds of appraisals. And the appraiser, the banks don't know what homes are next to what homes. They're looking at the comparables. So when they're getting the appraiser, they're looking at the comparables and they're noticing how far they are from that home. So if you've got homes that are next to these $1 million homes, banks have no idea. So it doesn't affect the value that way, where their bank will appraise it or will lend to a prospective buyer. Here we go. So I kind of threw up an example for you. This is here in Kaysville on Equestrian Estates down there. They've got some smaller lots. I don't know if you can see there, but there's some smaller homes that are surrounded by some bigger lot homes, and they're selling just fine. But you're not using those comparables. I don't know if you guys know where this area is down there, close. Okay. So there's some smaller homes and some smaller lot homes that are next to some of these bigger ones. As you can see, there's some that are for $700,000. There's one for $635,000. There's one for $640,000. Right next to $335,000 or $355,000 homes. So it's not necessarily affecting their values as much because the appraisers are looking at comparable homes. They're not looking at those smaller homes with the smaller lots. So if you were going to do that. Did I miss one? So if we were going to do that, I kind of threw an example up here. Do you have those PDFs by chance?
I do. You can tell Carlos is much more prepared than I am. Thank you for bearing with us.
It's okay. So anyway, there's if you were going to use those as comparables, I took one, for example, one that sold recently. When you switch it to the other one there for me. Here. So this is one that's there in that area, in that neighborhood. It's on Saddleback Circle. So if you scroll down, we can see the ones, there's a couple that are under contract, 374, 399. And then there's 2 more. So just if we were going to take comparables and compare them to those homes in that neighborhood, the value would have come in at, if you can see on the blue side there, if you scroll down to the bottom, it would have given us a value at $455 if we would have taken those as comparables. Yes, that would have affected the value. But as we can see, if you switch back to the other PDF, up there on the top left, it says list price. It actually sold for it started at $649, but it sold it for $635. So as we can see, those are homes in that same area, in that same neighborhood. If they would have used that, then the house would have sold at $4 whatever I had up there, but it doesn't. And so the appraisers don't use those. The banks won't look at them. The banks don't see them. So that's how it affects the appraised values in those. So the concern that the sellers have and people have, I understand their concern, but it really doesn't take into account what what the appraisers and the banks will actually look at affecting their true value of their home. Does that make sense? Yes. Great. No, I appreciate it. You guys have any questions? Anything me and my wife can answer for you?
I have a question in relationship to that. The way you make it sound is it's completely irrelevant what it's next to.
Not completely.
It can be next to a rendering plant, and it's going to be okay because you're looking. I'm just saying the way it was presented.
Okay.
You're saying it doesn't matter what you're next to.
Well, he did say that the market. He did say that the market
appraised
market
value
with appraised value.
Yeah, there's a difference between appraised value and market value.
Yes.
And I guess that's more my concern is when we have folks that come in and my property value is going to go down. I don't know that we've ever actually seen any empirical evidence that shows that the value goes down.
Yeah.
But maybe the perceived value, it takes longer to sell at that price. It's more, maybe they don't get the increase that they're hoping for. they want to sell it next year and get 50,000 more for it, and instead they get 25. Are there any statistics that show a property takes longer to sell based on what it's next to?
That's a great question. Really, it depends on what the market is doing in that neighborhood, in that area. So in the market that we're in right now, things could go just as fast or faster, depending on what's actually available. So the lower the inventory we have, the less likely people are going to be as picky. When we have more inventory and the market isn't as good, the economy isn't as good, then yeah, it takes a little bit longer. It's going to affect their market value a lot more. And it might take longer to sell, so they lower the price, which in effect could affect everybody else's home values in the neighborhood or in the area. So when you're taking into account those kind of homes, like I said, if you're closer to businesses or busy roads or railroads or situations like that, yes, that will affect the marketability of those homes. And the appraisers will take that into account when they go out there and appraise those homes. So when they see it, they'll say, okay, here, I'm going to discount this much because of being on this road or being on in this certain area or next to a certain business. They do take that into account. But when it's homes to homes, it really doesn't affect it as much as opposed to if you're next to maybe condos or some townhomes or something like that where lower income. But when you're looking at building something here right now in this economy, you're going to have a hard time finding homes to build under $350,000, especially if they're on a quarter-acre lot. You're still looking $450,000, $500,000 for a home. It's the minimum. It's kind of the way it is here in Kaysville. So it's I don't see how that could really affect who's coming into the community to purchase those homes, how it can affect as much their values or resale values, depending on who's moving in. Someone who can afford a $500,000 home most likely is going to be able to maintain and have the upkeep of that home. Also, depending on how you zone it or how you want to approve that land development, if it's in an HOE or a PUD, that could also help that marketability to help those people with the bigger lots kind of settle their nerves a little bit about who you're allowing to build in those communities too. That just a suggestion.
I have one question.
Yeah.
And you can answer this both from your perspective and then your understanding of just maybe from a realtor's perspective of sort of standards that a realtor might say. When you have a prospective seller come to you and say, okay, I'm looking to sell my home, and you're trying to tell them, okay, you're trying to price it, for what the market's going to bring for it. What are some things that would negatively affect that market value in terms of adjacent uses to that property?
No, I appreciate you bringing that up. I actually have one like that right now. It will, like I said, it'll be more. For instance, the one I've got is on Country Mill Drive. It's got a swimming pool. It's a large home, but it's on a busier street. It's closer to the freeway and closer to the railroad tracks. Those things do affect the value and what they'll be able to sell it for. I can pull comparables and bring in a value for what others are selling, but if it's close to those areas or close to those different things like a business or other items like that, it will affect the marketability and what people are willing to pay for a home. So ultimately, values what people are willing to pay. So if it's closer to nicer homes or nicer community, it's if people are willing to pay the higher price still for their large home, then that's the value.
Comment on that as well. This is Brick Heights, but I sold a home that was a 2-story single-family home on a very small lot, 0.7 acres, or 7 acres, and so when I sold the home, my value was coming up at about $389. Was about, I felt like a good fair price for it. Well, the same home, same floor plans, everything. This was up right off of Lloyd Street in Fruit Heights off 89. And the exact same homes that were within a mile, which appraisers usually use, over by the golf course, were selling for anywhere from $75,000 to $100,000 more for almost the same square footage. And so...
Because of what was around it.
Because of what was around it. So what was around this, it was the 379, the more affordable home. It was good. Some people saw 89 as being a drawback. Some of them saw it as a pro of just being able to hop right on. But the main thing that kind of killed the value on that, from my perspective and what I've heard from the feedback on the buyers that came through, was it overlooks that trailer park. And so they're like, I'm spending almost $400,000 on a home and I get to overlook a trailer park. So in essence, they were almost very identical. I mean, within 100 square feet of each other, and they were able to pull values and get those homes by the golf course much more of a desirable area for that much more. But just because of that little, surrounding what was surrounding, that's definitely affected it quite a bit. But yeah.
But with the market being the way it is, you still sold it very quickly within a week. So
how does undeveloped land compare? Because one of the things we run into is we have undeveloped land. People want to build on quarter-acre lots, and people scream and yell, our property value is going to go down. As compared to a vacant lot, it's going to go down, or will it?
Like I said, it just all depends on what's around that quarter-acre lot as well. If they're going to improve the lot in the neighborhood, it's not going to affect their.
So if I have
values.
a 1-acre lot with $1 million home on it,
Mm-hmm.
is my home more valuable with a quarter-acre lot with a $300,000 home, or is it more valuable with an empty lot with nothing on it?
It'll be the same. It'll probably be the same. So.
Because again, that's the argument we get.
Yeah.
You develop that quarter-acre lot, and my value's going down.
Yeah, like I said, unless you're putting in like trailer parks or condos or something like that, then it's going to it will. But if you're putting in, senior communities or some homes that are going to be well maintained, there's no reason why it would bring the values down. Like you said, and then the example I showed you right there. I mean, you've got $1 million homes a quarter mile away from them, the Symphony homes that are building right there next to these, smaller little homes as well. So it just depends on what's surrounding them. Okay. Cool. Any other questions? Thanks for letting me come, guys.
Appreciate your time. Thank you for your.
Thank you very much.
Both.
Appreciate it.
And we just lost our public.
Right. So does that mean we can easily move this amendment to another meeting?
Well, my
thank you.
Again, you have full control up there at the dais. My recommendation would just to do a quick introduction. I don't expect a decision or recommendation on it this evening. However, we're close to 9 o'clock, and if you're not wanting to spend another 10 minutes or something on that, then that's fine. But I think it is complex enough that I think just hopefully understanding the issues and putting it in front of you would be about as far as we get tonight.
Okay. I'll make an executive decision. Go ahead.
Okay,
so
get it done.
let the record reflect that drop in tone. If you must.
Let's just get it done.
You waited until 11 last week before you decided not to enter.
Yeah. Could wait
So
that
we-
long again.
Yeah.
We had a public hearing on this last
And look
time,
where it
right?
got us. Here we are again.
So, hopefully to keep it brief, but to put it on your radar, so hopefully we're all thinking at least of the same issues, and then you can take it back and sift on it and ponder on it, and hopefully come back with ideas, suggestions, or be more ready for a recommendation. Essentially, the reason this is before the Planning Commission right now is over the past, short term, several months, the demand from the telecommunication industry has been changing, at least from what I'm getting phone calls on, and they're a lot more creative and, in my opinion, probably better options for putting in cell tower equipment and infrastructure into Kaysville that we simply don't permit currently. So I've heard some specific ideas, some generic ideas on maybe how to accommodate those. Looked at that internally as staff as to maybe what seems to make sense. And so this is a proposal to hopefully help accommodate technology and the options that are coming forward and what we might see on cell infrastructure into the future. So I guess I'm not plugged into your computer. Just push it forward to the map. So in general, this map here shows where cell towers are currently allowed. It's in our agricultural zones and our commercial and light industrial districts. A little bit tough to see, but on this map you can see the location of the existing cell towers in town. Fairfield Junior High, just north of us on Center, or off of 200 North. West of the freeway, there are two, one just off of 200 North and one near Burton Lane. And then we've got a new one near Angel Street. And they're all almost identical, 120-foot, give or take, towers. Currently, our ordinance says you have to be able to co-locate with up to 3 users on them. And so this proposal is kind of a paradigm shift. So I think historically the city has said we want few towers, so we'll allow them to be a little bit bigger, but they're far and fewer in between. I think that's done pretty good with the coverage in the area. But as data use continues to skyrocket and technology changes, I think cell users are interested in getting into areas where there's higher concentrations of users. And to do that, they're often willing to do some more creative solutions that aren't so large and imposing. And so just the next slide. So part of what the ordinance is proposing to consider is, one, to allow what we'd consider a stealth tower. And maybe go one more, sorry. So again, currently we have the typical going 200 North.
I like these ones.
Isn't that beautiful? And you'll see those all over Vegas and other climates, right? Clearly it wouldn't be stealth in Kaysville. But it just shows you can get creative on different ways that they're able to build them.
Can we just get palm trees in Kaysville and not the cell towers?
We could require that.
I like the one that looks like a big tree.
Pine trees are all over Utah, that style of stealth tower in the mountains.
I've seen those, yeah. They have them in Sandy, for example. Big old pine tree.
Yeah.
You know, we have people running into poles all the time. I don't think we need to disguise
Maybe make them neon.
Are they privately owned?
Generally, yes. Not being the foremost expert on this, but kind of, as I understand it, the way the industry works, the cell providers don't like to own the towers, but there are companies that love to own the towers, and then they lease space to the cell providers. So American Towers or others, they'll build the infrastructure, then Verizon or Sprint or AT&T will come and lease a spot, and that's just the model they work off. But typically privately owned, it can be good revenue generators for certain properties. People like to have them on there. And right now, we wouldn't permit, I don't know that any of these are great examples of what you want in Kaysville, but technically it wouldn't even be an option in Kaysville. So in order to do something like this, typically you have less users. Currently we require at least 3. And so the ordinance is saying, okay, we'll allow you to go maybe with just 1 user if you're showing us that you can hide it a little better than a typical tower. Shorter, however, so we're not going to let you go as tall because you don't have as many users on it. And we'll let you go and be considered in different places. So what I think are good examples, we don't have a lot of height on our building in Kaysville, so we may not get a lot of requests for this. But a roof-mounted antenna can be pretty well screened. You got equipment on top of roofs all over the place anyway with AC units and so forth. So depending on the actual construction, those could work really well. Stuff that goes in with the existing utility poles. So you see that on the bottom right. Again, this is just a quick Google search on a few images, but much less imposing than the 120-foot tower style that we're currently permitting in Kaysville. So whether or not you like these things, that's your homework. Consider that. Are we more willing to allow this? And the other part of the proposal is we'd be changing, again, where they would be allowed. So partly what we're saying is now you're either agricultural, general commercial, or light industrial, and that's the only place it's permitted. We've changed that a little bit in this ordinance to say, okay, you could be considered if it's a stealth tower in public use zones, so public property within parks, schools, different things here in town have that zoning designation. Some towers could become a permitted use as listed if it's a stealth tower in our light industrial general commercial zone. Is at least the way that it's currently written, so the Planning Commission wouldn't necessarily see it. If a provider wanted to come do a roof mount antenna anyway on top of McDonald's or something, I don't know, then theoretically that could be would
Inside
be
the
permitted
arches.
use.
How many co-locators are you allowing?
So what this suggests, currently we require 3 total users, so 2 co-locators on every tower. It still says if you can go on an existing tower in the area of coverage you need to consider that tower first and prove us why that's not good enough. If you want to build a new tower, then if you're doing a stealth tower, you would not necessarily have to have co-location. So it would just be 1 user per tower is an option.
So what? Oh, go ahead.
Well, I'm changing the subject a little bit. So
I was going to say, so the one on Angel and 200, I remember I was out of town for about a week and I came back and all of a sudden there was this 120-foot tower that
is that the one over here that's on the?
Yes.
Yeah, and you know it's right in back of that big warehouse building, but it also is in the backyard of a lot of neighbors over there. So it's pretty much, I can see it from my front door too, but it's big, and it meets the area requirements that you've got, the location requirement, but it still borders along the residential side. So with this recommendation, it's saying that would permit these facilities in more locations, primarily very large properties, which the property it on is a large property. But what you're saying, though, you'd limit height restrictions, but you would add more into them. So what would the height restriction, how many would you allow in a certain location?
Well, so if they're trying to get into the same location, they need to use the existing towers first before they could build more. And then if they meet the other criteria of in a zone on a property that's large enough and with enough distance from other residentials, then the way it's written, there wouldn't be a limit necessarily on the number of towers. So if for some reason there were 10 cell users that all needed additional equipment and antenna, your existing tower's full, and they wanted to build another one, the way it's currently written, it wouldn't restrict that. So that could be a suggestion that comes into play that needs to be put in place. As it's written, every tower in town would continue to be conforming to the existing ordinance, but one. And so one of the suggestions, that one on 200 North, would become a non-conforming tower. So it's essentially states that the monopole, those 120-foot towers, would no longer be a permitted use in the central commercial zone. So here in Main Street, essentially between 200 North and 200 South. So again, if there are other questions, so this is a draft to push out to the Planning Commission to get started on, and it could be a pretty complex issue and a lot of preference to consider. And so that's where I wouldn't expect tonight that you say, yeah, we like this, don't like this, change this, do that, or recommend it. But yeah, if you have other questions now, or you want to feed them to me offline, or we're certainly welcome to pursue that, or we can deal with this and come back after you've read through it more.
I have one question. It seems like maybe these cell towers require Planning Commission input regardless. I mean, I don't know. Maybe we can, and maybe Gary's example is a good example of how it can fit within the current ordinances and still not be appropriate. I mean, had we known Gary could see us from his front door, we would not.
Well, I haven't seen.
Yeah, I mean, if you would have just showed up to the meeting, you could have said that.
Yeah, if I had showed up.
It's the yellow sign.
Well, that one, they didn't even need to come to us.
Right, but that's my point.
But I've, and I don't know if you've gotten complaints. I haven't really said anything about it. I mean, I see it. It's a little obtrusive, but it bothers my neighbors a lot more than me. And I've had several people ask me, can they build that? That thing's like massive.
I'll tell you my experience. Freeport has 4 towers on it. We own one, and there are just a few players, whether it's Crown Castle, and Verizon, T-Mobile, and all of them go on their towers. They do the actual lease of it, so that's why I asked about co-locators. That's where an individual would make their money, because they get 30% or whatever of the tower or of the revenue that the leasee is making off that tower. So I think by limiting, we may limit who would actually come out here. I think they acquired like 5,000 towers in the last year. So anyway, that's been my experience.
It seems like to me this is almost everybody wants more and better coverage. And that's probably a much greater need. In fact, I think if we asked people, they would say, make it ugly and give us more coverage.
Right.
But as a planning commission, I think we have a duty to try to make the city look as nice and as pleasant as possible. And I think one of the problems I see with Kaysville is kind of because it's grown from this agricultural to now we're getting more kind of suburban. We have a lot of areas that look kind of junky, and they have the utility boxes out front, or you have a broken down tractor that's on a nice road that, the neighborhood looks really nice, but around it, because it's still at A1, they can leave tractors and stuff out. And so this is a real difficult balancing. But I know the more kind of bare equipment we have, the less pleasant it is just to view. And that, to me, I think is right in the center, sweet spot of what the Planning Commission is supposed to do.
So, Lyle, I'm guessing in this ordinance you haven't addressed the new technology, the small cell towers.
We didn't address it specifically. So, the legislature, so these would be considered a macro site, I believe is the nomenclature. And then the small cell sites are becoming more and more predominant in the industry, where
it's
kind of shorter towers.
It's the technology, too, I guess, that 5G is going to use as companies start to putting in 5G.
And the understanding that I have, so with the legislation, they're essentially saying that we have to have standards so that when they do want to go in within the right-of-way, and the small cell site could technically use existing utility poles and pretty much add right onto it.
Yeah, they're not very big. They're only a foot or two. Well, there are some boxes that are a little bit bigger, but a lot of them are just a foot or two big.
Right.
Square, and then they go on a lot of them go on existing utility towers. And
so the power department is essentially looking at creating standards that when those are proposed, how and where they'll accommodate those type of users.
Yeah, they're a lot more frequent. You get a lot more of them, but
right. The industry, the individuals that I spoke with when considering this said you still have to have the macro site system, so the big tall towers.
Right.
And then these the small cell sites just kind of feed off of that.
Relay station, yeah.
And they're meant for concentrated population areas. So maybe one by a football stadium or Times Square, or, extreme examples maybe, but Kaysville is not an ideal candidate for those types of technologies because we're so spread out, both with our business and population. But technology will change. It does every year, and we may see more and more requests that we don't have any of those currently within the city that I'm aware of. So,
well, I have some clients that have cell towers, so I come across these kind of numerous times over the year. And the one thing I've figured out is that the people who want them up there, this is a very important investment to them. And short-term costs like making it look better, they're totally down for that, because how important it is to keep their coverage map. And so my thought is, and I remember one of my first planning commission meetings way back when, there was some discussion, and I think the commission decided not to force the applicant to make it look pretty. And I regretted not having done that, because over the years I've figured out that asking them to spend another $1,000 or a couple $100 or whatever to fix it, of course they don't want to do that, but they're more than willing to do it because the location is so important to them. So I think it's the time for us as the commission to extract whatever minor conditions we feel would make a difference to keep it looking nice.
I think you're absolutely right. We, same with commercial office buildings, we've had, particularly with the higher locations, they love to put them on, and the ones that we have allowed, like the ones you're talking, they're 24 inches or so, and they have to blend into the building. So when they mount them up on the top, they have to be the same color as the ephes or stucco or the whatever the finish is, so that they're camouflage basically. And we only allow certain areas, and they haven't. I mean, they'll do it in a heartbeat just because of the strategic locations and how they have to. They've mapped it. They know where they need to be to.
And these are like 50-year leases, right? So I mean, you get it. They'll take, most of the time they'll have a lease that they can renew, like 5 years or 10 years, and they can start off. They can have 50 years there if they want. That's the way I've seen the leases. And so, again, it becomes, if you amortize, camouflage costs over 50 years, it's nothing.
150-foot tree.
Well, sometimes you got to make it make sense, but.
Just if I could quickly input my perspective on this. Part of the reason this has come up is we've had a couple requests of things that we think make reasonable sense, such as could we put a cell tower on top of one of the light fixtures at Davis High football field? That seems to make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Our ordinance doesn't provide for that. We had another request recently to put a cell tower somewhere on DATC campus. Again, that makes a lot of sense. You've got big buildings, you've got large distances from residential housing. That makes sense. It's not permitted in our ordinance.
Yeah.
So what we've been trying to do is figure out how to make our ordinance and common sense be the same thing. And we're finding in this particular case, it's very, very difficult.
Well, I represent school districts, and they all have cell tower lease. I mean, it's very common to put them on schools.
So part of the ordinance was if you have a piece of property under one ownership that's of a certain size, that could be considered for a cell tower, because then you can stick it into the middle of the property and it only affects, or it more only affects just that property. Obviously, you can still see them. And when you start talking about aesthetics, I think there's two parts. There's the aesthetics at the ground, which I think was what we talked about. Lyle has these pictures. The water tower, that makes sense. We don't have any water towers. We have mountains. If you're in Texas or wherever, you see those everywhere, and that would make sense to me. If you put a palm tree or a 120-foot pine tree, that doesn't fit with the natural environment in Kaysville. So it's tough. Sometimes if you had the 120-foot pine tree thing, that would stick out more than the cell tower would and look more out of place. So you got to be careful when you start saying aesthetics.
I'd rather see a goofy pine tree, or honestly even a palm tree. It would be a talking point. Hey, there's Kaysville palm, as opposed to another tower.
We're just saying you could put Christmas lights on that thing too.
Yeah. It would be out of place character-wise for the city, but
just
the
a
trick
quick
for
example. The big power poles that are on 2nd North of Main Street right over here. Nobody noticed them until somebody said, oh, we should make those look better and paint them. And then they stick out and everybody notices. And it was just a pole that blended into the background. You kind of didn't worry about it. But just that's what we're trying to do is, I think you guys have caught the drift pretty well, is figure out how you can make an ordinance that allows them to be where they make the most sense, and hopefully pushes them away from the areas that don't make sense, which they may be allowed in currently. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on this item, so thank you.
Thanks.
Do we have any flexibility of what we could make them look like? Could we have them build a giant dart over by Davis High? And
there used to be.
Like
sign into it, out on Main Street.
I mean, that'd be a heck of
It's
a
really
cell
ugly.
tower if it looked like a dart coming into the.
Plus, if any kids got a hold of it, you know how darts are. Okay. We ready for?
When you go down that road.
All right. Call the public. Done. Anything else?
Just a quick comment, maybe. Just as I thought about the flow of the meeting, and as you all may know, I've done a lot of these kinds of meetings. I'm just wondering when we do our order of business, where Lyle and Andy do a presentation, and then maybe the next thing to do would be to hear from the applicant. So we have the staff presentation, then we hear from the applicant, then we open the public hearing or public comment. Then we have the applicant respond again to what the public comment was, and then we have our discussion. In a way, because a lot of times I'm sitting here thinking, well, so what's the applicant got to say about this? And usually they'll get up during the public comment portion, but sometimes they'll just kind of sit there and not say anything. So I'm wondering if that might be a good flow for the meeting. Just an idea, suggestion.
We've done that. It seems kind of ebb and flows sometimes, but I agree. I do think that it's good to have them kind of rebuttal if they give their speech, their presentation too. Then it gives them a chance to come up and address the issues that are brought up during a public hearing.
Yeah, always good to hear from them. Even though the staff gives all the particulars, it's good to hear from them what they're intending and thinking.
A lot of questions that the public's going to stand up and ask.
Yeah.
Doesn't stop them from still asking.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely.
I know. That's the sad part.
I think it's a good idea.
Yeah. Good. Just in other quick reports, we're still on for typical schedule in October, as far as I know, the 11th and the 25th. I'm going to send out an email probably tomorrow or first part of next week regarding a training with the Land Use Institute of Utah, and just gauge interest on it. It happens to be a little bit more pricey of a training, but also very good. And so depending on the interest level of the commission, just let me know once you've seen it. It's October 23rd and 24th. We'll make some decisions on who and how and what participation we can do as a city to get you there, depending on what your interest. These two are, it's essentially a Tuesday and a Wednesday.
Yeah. It's kind of broken up into two different agendas. You could attend just the one day and probably be.
I did that a long time ago. Liked it.
Mm-hmm. Like the one day they're talking mostly about housing shortage, and certainly there be things there that apply to you.
It's pretty deep, which some of you like.
Yeah, it's much more in depth.
Where's it at, Lon?
I think they hold it, if it's the same place, down in Sandy at the Realtors building.
It's the Salt Lake Board of Realtors building down in Sandy.
So I'll send that out, so again, just send it back if you're at least interested, and then we'll gauge what we're able to do to help you participate if there is enough interest or depending. And then the last item I had, there have been some changes on what the city's been able to do as far as electronic devices, the way that the council kind of operates now with iPads. So we're considering that for the Planning Commission at some point, at least as an option, so electronic instead of hard copies of agendas and so forth. One of the advantages, at least that I see, would be not only to have the agenda, but you would then have access to the general plan, zoning maps, other documents on one device.
And access to the charter, would we have access?
The charter.
Yeah.
So,
if I can put in a plug for that, we did that at Salt Lake City when I was there. Just instead of, our agendas at Salt Lake City were massive. Yeah. And sometimes we had documentation that thick that went out to the Planning Commission for every meeting. So we got them iPads, and they just look up everything on the iPad, and it really worked well. Really worked well.
So we got at least one.
You got to get your Wi-Fi working better.
Well, and that's, so there are some challenges to figure out.
Cell tower.
Yeah. We have some ideas on how we can help with that, but we wanted to gauge the interest. We've talked about it off and on as a planning commission, whether that's the route you want to go. So before we really dive after it, just wanted to make sure that's still of interest, and then we'll pursue it. Unless there's enough opposition that we just like things as they are, then that's fine too. But
Could we get like advertising on the back of it too, and like defray some costs? No, okay.
There's a big apple on it.
Defray orthodontics right over there.
I wasn't going to say this out loud, but this training, we don't want you guys using that for continuing education attorney stuff.
That is a great idea.
That is. Yeah. Some of my,
CE, huh?
yeah.
That's enough for me. So.
Okay. Take a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Nice.